anyway.
Yeah.
That
So
makes sense.
no, totally. I think that that's exactly right. It's not just about the words you cut, it's about which words are you choosing to leave, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so today we're going to get into 3 points, 3 tips that have really helped us kind of lean towards minimalism in our own scripts. The first one is just the language of your scene description. So it's a little broad, but we're going to kind of go over some tips there. Sound, using sound to cut down on a bunch of extra words. And third is taking advantage of the white space on the page, using that to help you tell the story. And so for each of these, we have a little example that we're going to read, and then we are going to try to fix. So
Right.
let's first talk about language in scene description. So I have this, let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger for those watching, but I have this little paragraph um, with some fun descriptions that I like that may not be the strongest for a screenplay necessarily. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is
I'll read it.
this is an opening scene. Yeah, here we go.
So, exterior front porch day. An old dog, more poodle than dog,
No
or
puddle.
more puddle than dog, sorry, melts onto the rotting wooden dock. The screen door clings to the frame for dear life. Even the flies hide from the heat under the rafters. Just an average summer afternoon in Cheswick County. Yeah, see, that's like what I now this there are lots of different overwritten paragraphs. This is overwritten in the direction of ornate detail, unfilmables, and just novelistic language. There's a I forget who and which screenwriter constantly says save it for your novel. You know, I think it was Blake Snyder. It does not matter, but there are a lot of expressions here that aren't necessarily going to give us the most vivid visual experience on the page. For example, I would describe how do you describe this dog, right?
Yeah.
An old dog, more puddle than dog, melts into the rotting wooden deck. First of all, unless we actually mean the dog is literally melting into the wooden deck like it was hit by a laser or something, shouldn't use kind of a metaphor to show something that we have to see because you can't you can't shoot a picture of a dog. I didn't want to say you can't shoot a dog. You can't film a dog on a porch just as it is and convey the sense that it's melting. You could maybe say it droops, right? So you want to have a verb that actively represents what you're doing. But like an old dog, I would say you could you could reduce that whole sentence to what type of breed of dog do we want to make it, Alexie? Because I think that helps sometimes.
He's an old pointer.
What's a pointer?
Pointer, like an English pointer, like a hunting dog.
Okay, so we say English pointer.
Yeah, you can say English pointer, but pointer
Pointer
works
was
too.
a dog because I
Huh?
don't know anything about dogs. I wouldn't
Oh,
know that
yeah.
Pointer was a dog, but you could say an old English pointer droops on the wood deck right there. And
Yeah.
how many words have we cut from there? You know,
That's true.
if we did, they say the word dog twice.
That's true. One version that I would kind of do, honestly, is there is a version of this where you choose one great detail and you really lean into that, right? Because we're talking about 3 different things and then ending with kind of a summary, like just an average afternoon summer in Cheswick County. But we're talking about the dog that's like melting on this porch. We're talking about the screen door and we're talking about the flies. And so you have your eye kind of jumping all over this porch, right? And if you can choose one detail or choose the details more carefully, we can direct kind of our mind's eye to where we want it to go so it feels more like a shot. I think that a big reason why this doesn't work as it is not necessarily because it's like bad language. It's because this is supposed to be a guide to a visual medium, right? This is supposed to be translated into a visual medium. And scene description in general, something that really, really has helped me over the years, is thinking that whatever is written in your scene description or your action is exactly what is going to be filling the frame, exactly what's going to be filling the screen at that moment in the script. So if we think about kind of that we're looking at this as a frame, this is what's in the camera lens. We start with this old dog being really hot on the wooden deck, right? And then we're
You could
seeing the
so in terms of how do we convey that simply, I would say sweaty dog snores.
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Because we already told them that we don't need to say that we're on the rotting wooden deck because in the exterior front porch, we've already said we're on a front porch.
Yep.
Sweaty, or I would say ancient, so just one good adjective to give us texture because we don't want to like have flat textureless ready. So what adjective should we use to describe the dog?
Decrepit.
A decrepit dog snores. Boom.
Yeah.
Right there. And snore you can film that. It communicates everything that is filmable about this sentence. And it's 4 words. So Alexie's going to write a decrepit.
How do you spell decrepit? Did I spell it right?
Yeah, that's right.
Snores.
Boom. Next sentence. The screen door clings to the frame for dear life. For dear life, we could just cut. And also, I think we could cut what is this screen important? Do we need to show it?
That's true. I think it would depend on if somebody's about to emerge from it or something. Like, like if so that's kind of what I was saying before about when we're going through the sentence, we talk about the dog, we talk about the door, we talk about the flies under the rafters. So if we are imagining this as being translated directly into a visual medium, what's essentially happening is we're starting with a frame on the dog, we're moving to the screen door, then we're moving to the rafters. So we have gone from dog, door, rafters in terms of our attention. And then we just say it's another summer afternoon in Cheswick County. So you have to think about, does that flow, dog, door, rafters, complement whatever action you're going to have that follows? So if the next thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to come out the door, you might not want to go to the rafters at all. So then you're going to be going back to the door. Like, remember, you're thinking about your shots. And it could be that we start much wider. When we spend so much time on dog, we spend a whole sentence on door, and we spend a whole sentence on the flies under the rafters. That feels very intentional, and it implies that we're going to have an intentional shot of that detail, right? Like it implies... Yeah.
In this scene, are we going to have the door be important? Is somebody going to come out of it?
I'm imagining eventually someone's going to have to come out of the door or go onto the porch. Like it's going to be someone going into the door or out of the door.
So if it's clinging to the frame for dear life, we could have it say the screen door rattles.
Yeah. As, we just kind of jump right into whatever is important about this, about like the screen door rattles as Adam comes out, as Adam emerges. That kind of a thing.
I would say you could even cut as and make it its own.
So, and we'll say Adam saunters. I like saunters.
I don't know if saunters. Well, also, I would say let's finish the description we have before going to because we're setting the scene before the action, right? So a decrepit dog snores, the screen door rattles, flies are everywhere.
Yeah. We'll say flies everywhere.
Flies everywhere, yeah. And then line break, possibly. I'd say instead of saunters outside, I would say Adam pushes through the door, possibly.
I would potentially save the screen door for until you come out. So I might just say
yeah, that's right.
That's right. I might say a decrepit dog snores, flies everywhere. And then
you could also replace the just an average summer afternoon Cheswick County, because like
I
don't necessarily dislike a tone setting line like that, as long as it's like a vibe that you could capture.
Yeah.
Right. Like you could change that to something similar, like you don't want to hang out here or something. Right. Like,
no, totally. Yeah. Like this isn't somewhere anyone wants to be. The last place anyone wants to be.
Yeah. The last place anybody wants to be.
So then we've gone from, let's just say that this is this is where we'll say shuffles outside.
Yeah,
So
because who's the this guy has to fit the house we're describing, right?
So now we've gone from exterior front porch day. An old dog, more puddle than dog, melts onto the rotting wooden deck. The screen door clings to the frame for dear life. Even the flies hide from the heat under the rafters. Just an average summer afternoon in Cheswick County. We've transformed that into exterior front porch day. A decrepit dog snores, flies everywhere, the last place anyone wants to be. The screen door rattles. Adam shuffles outside.
That's so
See,
much better.
it's so much better. See, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint why, but my understanding of why is because have successfully done like a smooth direction of what's going to be in the frame. We're not kind of going from like one thing, another thing, another thing. We've saved the door until it matters because it's not essential in that moment.
Another thing you could do is, depending on where you want to place the implied camera, you could get rid of the screen door and have it be rattle. Adam shuffles through the screen door.
Yeah, that's true. Rattle. Adam shuffles through the screen door. Screen door.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
So,
fun.
and like the basic ethos here is sort of like you don't want to lose tone of language. And you don't want to lose specific imagery where it matters, but you want to place it into shots. Every sentence is a shot or a sound that a microphone can pick up. And even if it's a sentence like the last place you want to be, a set designer can capture that, right? Like, whereas just another summer afternoon in Cheswick County implies a lot, like it implies a perception of time that a narrator in a novel might communicate to an audience. But like, if you're just got a camera and you're filming a porch, it's a set somewhere, you're not going to get that scale of time from it. What you can show is that this is a shitty porch that we don't want to be around, you know? So if you want to have that kind of impressionistic, like summarizing language of place that kind of buttons a paragraph, like the last place anyone wants to be, like, I like the flow of that. It's like front porch day, which is our exterior. A decrepit dog snores, flies everywhere, last place anyone wants to be. We got two very specific images of the porch and that nice summary line. But the summary line is something that is filmable by you can capture and represent on camera.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So to kind of summarize the things that we have done to this, essentially what we have done is first off, we've tightened up the words. So you don't have to always have a complete sentence every single time. You can just have sentence fragments, flies everywhere. The last place anybody wants to be is more than fine in screenwriting. You can immediately cut that down. The other thing that we've done is we've gone for vivid verbs. I say the original wasn't necessarily not vivid verbs, but it was vivid in a way like melts into the rotting wooden deck can be confusing. So we chose to
They were vivid
emphasize
metaphors and
vivid
abstractions.
yes.
Right.
And then the other thing is focus on great details, specifically fewer great details. So we went with just a decrepit dog snores, flies everywhere. When we had it originally, there was a lot of details that we were giving to people. It was not just the dog. It was the fact that the dog is hot and it's on this wooden deck. It's the fact that the screen door is in a frame falling out, and the fact that there's all these flies in the rafters. You know, it was a lot of little details. And instead we chose two. We chose the dog, we chose the flies, and we moved on. So one great detail. And we also thought about
one thing before we move on though is I think it's important to note that you can underwrite this too, right?
Yeah.
The point of minimalism, right, is to not lose the vivid feeling or tone, right? You could have written exterior front porch day, a dog sleeps, a sleeping dog, and it's a windy day. Adam walks through the door, right? Like that doesn't give us a sense of tone. It doesn't give us any vibe, and vibe is really important. I don't think you should lose vibe. And I think so many beginning screenwriters, they take that first axiom of you can only show what only show what can be seen and what can be recorded or heard, and they kind of under render detail. I think you should try and keep the soul of feeling you want to communicate, but do it with as compact language and imagery as possible.
That's right. The original one definitely had like kind of an off-kilter feel. Like we were intentionally talking about the rotting wooden deck. We were intentionally talking about how the screen door is falling out and chose the language, it's clinging for dear life. It was all these things designed, like even the flies hide, the idea of like insects hiding. There was definitely an attempt to like make this feel kind of uneasy, right? Uneasy in sort of like a lazy hot day way. And we have captured the same kind of uneasiness in like a decrepit dog snores, flies everywhere, the last place anyone wants to be. But we've done it so much faster. So it's not just a matter of cutting words for the sake of cutting words. Like I could just say a dog is hot, like Adam was saying. Like you can cut more words than this, but it's about saying what you want to say, conveying what you want to convey more directly and more straightforward. So we've gotten vivid verbs, we've gotten one great detail, and we've gotten
considering
the camera lens, right? So considering your frame that you're implying with each of these lines. And we're also talking a little bit about maintaining the tone that you want to go. So in terms of like, when have I cut enough? It's, you don't want to cut, or like, when am I going to cut too much? It's about when you're going to lose the tone that you're trying to convey. If at this point, cutting this down any further would lose the vibe, it is no longer worth it. The vibe is extremely, you got to keep the vibe,
That's right. So otherwise
So,
people's eyes glaze over and they don't even read it,
yeah,
you gotta keep the vibe. So number
totally.
2,
Let's see. Oh, this is number 3. Let me pull up number 2. Well, anyway, number 2, though, is going to be sound. So basically what we're talking about for this is the fact that you can use sound effects to tighten up your scene description. And we kind of just did it here in the previous one, where instead of talking about the door rattling and stuff like that, we just said rattle, right? So we've kind of already done this a little bit. So let me just, here we go. There we go. And I will zoom this in.
Great.
So here is one to talk about sound.
Interior, creepy hallway night. With slow, careful steps, Adam makes his way down the hall. Suddenly, one of the door handles rattles, the sound reverberating down the bare walls. Adam gasps and raises his bat. I have a baseball bat?
Yeah, you have a bat now. Well, you have a hat, so now you have a bat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Mhm.
So in terms of general cleanup here, I would say you could change with slow, careful steps to Adam creeps down the hall.
So that's a vivid verb change, right? That's kind of what we
Yes.
were. That's a vivid verb change. So Adam creeps down the hall.
Makes his way down, creeps through.
Mhm.
Creeps through, creeps down. What is he doing? What's the move? I think through is because you're walking through a hall. You don't necessarily walk down the hall.
Actually,
I don't know.
Let me duplicate this so that we can compare and contrast later.
Yeah,
There
but
we
to
go.
take with slow, careful steps, Adam makes his way down the hall. To compress that into Adam creeps through the hall, you've cut so many words and conveyed the exact same information. And this kind of just, again, we're reiterating how great vivid verbs are. You can compress so much time and space with just a better verb. You can cut so much, like, just extra white noise information. That's kind of how I see that type of rewriting. But in using sound, we got this great verb rattles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the door handle rattles, the sound reverberating down the bare walls. So what we're trying to communicate is this guy's kind of walking through maybe he's like afraid, maybe he's like stalking his victim, who knows. He's trying to be quiet and is very aware of the sounds that are made, right? So when a sound from the hall makes its way to him, it's like very noticeable. So we're placing a lot of emphasis on this. So I would definitely capitalize the verb rattles if we're going to use it.
There's a version of this. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I would center it as the beginning of a sentence, kind of like rattle or.
I was thinking about doing like RT.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's a pro move.
You know, there you go. You got to do it like a comic, and then we say.
Yeah, that's good. So what Alexie's done, she's changed. Suddenly, one of the door handles rattles, the sound reverberating down the bare walls, to a door.
And then we have,
is that the door handle is important because it's like somebody's opening the door.
Yeah. Or like someone's trying to open like the door, kind of,
you know, like, but you want to like show the sound effect because that's how it'll feel on screen, right?
You could even just do Adam snaps his eyes to like the door, like Adam looks at the door, or like, you know, something like that, like where it's like we're implying that it's coming from the door. But
or Adam snaps his head towards the door or something.
Yeah.
The door handle like hinge, like sort of creeps open or something, creeps down. Like, how do you say that? It pivots, it
eases down. It's kind of like it's, you know, turns.
Because the implied camera angle is
tight on it, right?
We're on Adam. We hear the sound, but we don't go. Turns to look at the door, and then the door handle creeping open, right? Like, so that could be kind of cool.
Yeah. So we could do Adam's eyes snap to Adam's eyes.
That's right.
Snap to like
I would say they snap to the door. And then you can say the handle
turns.
Shakes.
We can even
turns. It turns. I love that. Turns. That's a good one.
There we go.
Yes. So Mark brings up a great point. You can snap your fingers, but you cannot snap your eyes. You can have somebody whip their eyes. Like you want to get the sense of like they're turning. If you want to be more specific, the head could turn, right? That's kind of where metaphors can connect like kinetic movement. Like metaphors to describe like stationary things or describe individuals is less forgivable than metaphors to describe movement. I think you can actually give a pass in a screenplay on metaphors describing movement as long as it feels like, oh, I know what that shot is. Right.
As long as it's immediately clear what it is. Because when I said the dog melts into the porch, and that was one of the things that we are opening with, it is unclear if I mean literally. Right? Like,
right. Well, because you could. Like, and even if it does connect the vibe, it's like it's not something that's necessarily achievable, right? Like you can, with an edit, do action of like characters interacting with their environment or moving, you know, a little easier, I would say. But I would also say that's technically correct, right? Like in general, you want to show things that are filmable. Like the handle can turn, the handle can't, you know, jump upside down, you know.
So the other thing that I'll say that we have done without even talking about it is we've removed the word suddenly, which is almost always unnecessary, right?
Yes.
What happens, like when you're writing scene description, everything is happening one beat after the other. So usually what suddenly implies is that it's something kind of startling, right? Like it implies that it's something that's almost interrupting the previous action. And I've found that the way that feels much more natural and has like a more economical use of space is to just immediately jump to whatever is interrupting the action. So you don't necessarily have to do the sound, the of the door handle rattling, right? You could just do a handle rattle, like a door handle rattles, right? If that is interrupting it, and keeping it short and as an interruption can replace the suddenly. And I think that in general, that tends to read more strongly.
I would also say here, just to recap what we have here. Interior creepy hallway night. Adam creeps through the hall. Adam's eyes snap to the door. The handle turns. Adam raises his bat. We could give a little bit more, another sentence right after creeping through the hall to give us a sense of like weight and like we're walking through him. You know, it's quiet. There's not a sound except his breathing, or like something like that. Like he holds his breath.
Yeah. There we go. Adam creeps through the hall. Period. Holding his breath.
I would say holds. He holds his breath.
You can do either way. I know that that's one of the things that's kind of controversial about gerunds, and I will say that there's a time and place for both, but holds is fine here, and holding is fine. It just kind of depends on what you're going for. Like when is he holding it? And we can do, and just to get rid of the snap, we'll do Adam's eyes dart to the door.
Oh yeah, I accidentally almost said that anyway because I feel like
I know.
It's more of a common expression. Your eyes. People are used to the sentence "eyes dart."
Yeah,
that's kind of what it just means. Like it's a shot of the eyes turn, right?
To kind of remind what we have done here, we've replaced this long line, which is suddenly one of the door handles rattles, the sound reverberating down the bare halls, down the bare walls, with Adam's eyes dart to the door, the handle turns. So it's sort of we've put Adam's reaction in the middle of it, but the only thing that we talk about with the door handle is because we're having Adam's eyes dart to it, which is his reaction, and then we're hearing that the handle turns, which implies that what we were just hearing, the was the door handle trying to turn, and that has really tightened this whole thing up. So
one note I would make is Adam raises his bat and the handle turns on the same line because it's a direct reaction to the door. Like the handle is turning and raising his bat, it feels like kind of like the same moment.
Yeah.
And when you do a line break, there's a rhythm change. Like we move on to the next kind of bundle of, it feels like a different moment, right? A paragraph feels like a moment. That's how I distinguish, or that's how I decide when to make a line break.
Totally, which is actually what we're going to talk about next.
All right, let's pivot to the next one.
Let's do it. So the next one that we're talking about is taking advantage of white space. So Adam, what were you just talking about in terms of like each line being a moment?
Yeah, so I personally think that people, I think a lot of screenwriters when they're starting don't really, how to say this? A lot of screenwriters are very arbitrary when they make a line break on the page, which is basically a break to the next paragraph or a break to the next line, like pressing the enter button, making white space happen. Like you got a whole paragraph, you cut in half. Some people just do it just for optics of like, oh yeah, I've got a lot of text. I'm just going to press enter in the middle to enter or return, depending if you're a PC or Mac user, and just create a line break that way. And I think people should be very deliberate and intentional with their line breaks because it's how you create attention on the page, right? People's eyes are scanning the document. And I like to think of it as like if every sentence is a shot and then every paragraph is kind of a sequence of shots that makes up a moment, right? Like if you go back to that first example we use with the porch, right? I would probably write the description of everything we see and hear on the porch in one paragraph and then end with kind of that summary line.
Yeah.
In general, you want to have like sense of establishing who, what, when, where we are, and kind of then what the action is when you're starting a scene. But like those are different moments, right? So if you're establishing this is the information to know where we are and what's happening, and then action of the scene starts, that's a natural place to make a line break. And you could do this in dialogue too, or not just dialogue, but like a scene where, okay, you have lots of, let's just say you have a scene of just straight dialogue with no narrative description for a whole page. I would look into that scene and think, where can I make a natural kind of moment to show an image or to show a sound that kind of gives us a sense of like, oh, this conversation tonally shifted. A character is doing something different. Like, because you want to think about how stuff is blocked. You want to think about how stuff is staged. Even if the director completely throws out your idea, you want to give a little something. And I think there's a fine line between full on directing on the page and like saying he sits up, he stands down, he does this. I wouldn't say that that's useful unless it's important to the plot, like a character is interacting with a prop that's important or something. But in general, you want to like have a sense of like, instead of just writing beat all the time, beat, 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 which is a moment, right? You could show us what the moment is. I'm kind of getting off track here, but like when you make a line break, it is a distinct moment, and paragraph, which is a bunch of different shots, make up one moment. So let's look at this example. Alexie, unless you have something else to say.
No, I was going to say that in particular, kind of like to sum up what you're saying, line breaks and white space play with time, right? Because one page of a screenplay roughly translates to 1 minute of screen time. And so when you are putting things on their own line, you are giving them more screen time than they would typically have in some ways. Like you're putting them on, you're giving them their own space, you're giving them their own moment. And so that's one way to think about it. And it's really useful for conveying the passage of time. And the flip side of it is that it's also useful for distinguishing actions, like what Adam was saying. Like if you're in a fight scene, having different people's actions on different lines can be helpful for breaking up, for helping people to just comprehend how this fight scene is playing out. So let's take a look at this little scene, which is very much about the passage of time. So it is interior waiting room day. Alexie sits in the waiting room, tapping her foot anxiously. This is taking much longer than she expected. Seconds turn into minutes, minutes to hours, and still nothing. One by one, the other people in the room leave until she is alone, waiting. So that's the paragraph that we're kind of playing with. And we want to try to use white space to convey the passage of time in a more succinct and honestly impactful way. So one of the first things I think that I would do, and Adam, I'm curious if you would do this, is I read this first sentence and I see that Alexie is tapping her foot anxiously. And I immediately see tapping and I'm like, that could be sound, like what we just talked about. Like that could be, a lot of times people use sound to convey the passage of time, like the clicking of a clock, or like somebody's fiddling with a pen and clicking it a bunch of times because they're nervous. So if we have a tapping foot, then we could do something like tap, 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 Adam, how do you feel about that?
I like that a lot. I mean, it implies like a close up on that action. And then what we kind of want to think about, in general, you want to establish what we're seeing. It's a waiting room, but waiting room is like an implied shot. But then like tap, tap, tap is a great way to, it feels motivated because it's a waiting room, right? So we're on the action of waiting. But then I would zoom out to give us a sense of, it's kind of reversing. Usually you establish and then you show action. This is showing action and then zooming out to establish, which I think is kind of cool. Depends on the scene, obviously.
So the immediate approach that I have to this is really using that tap, 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 tap on its own line in order to convey the passage of time. So I had here tap, 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 tap. Alexie bounces her leg. And then I was planning to repeat that and say tap, 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 tap. Other patients leave. So the waiting room empties. And then I would do tap, 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 tap. She is alone. And I actually kind of do like adding the waiting on its own thing. So that's my proposal for how I would change it. So to read it real quick is interior waiting room day. Tap, 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 tap. Alexie bounces her leg. Tap, 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 tap. The waiting room empties. Tap, 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 tap. She is alone, waiting. So that's my pitch for how I would revise this. How would you go about it, Adam, or what do you think of this edit?
I would stagger the tap, tap, taps because it's a lot of the same rhythm, right? Like I would maybe like have 5 and then 3. Because you want it to like feel like there's a progression, right? Because if we're showing an action like that, we want to feel like we're progressing in action.
Or we could even reverse it. I would suggest reversing it because it's implying that Alexie's getting more anxious, right? Like we have tap tap tap. Alexie bounces
Yeah,
her leg,
sure.
tap, tap, and then just like it keeps going, it keeps adding more, um, because she's becoming more anxious as she waits in this waiting room, which shows like this is taking longer than she expected. The time here is passing very slowly, and then also for those who can't see what is being written, when I had it as tap 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 5 taps, it was lining up almost directly with the end of the other sentences, which made it kind of look just a block on the page. And that's another way to use white space, is to just make things more readable. So let's try this a different way. This is just one approach where you can use sound to do it. Adam, how would you approach this one?
So Alexie sits in the waiting room, tapping her foot anxiously. This is taking much longer than she expected. Seconds turn to minutes, minutes to hours, and still nothing. One by one, the other people in the room leave until she is alone, waiting. Yeah, so there are a few ways to do this. One is, I would maybe start to just do something different. Um, Alexie slumps in her chair, right?
Okay.
A good verb to be like to establish. Like if we're going to do, if your version was action, then establish it, or you're just doing action, 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 and which is a total legitimate way to do it. But Alexie slumps in her chair, and then I would go. I would describe all the people. Like the line is endless.
Yeah.
And then I would go to the clock, tick, tick, tick. I would just do two ticks. Yeah. The clock on the wall reads 10:15. And I would probably do it by like the clock moving forward.
Okay.
Right? Like if I really wanted a sense of like that she's been waiting a lot of time, I would maybe do like a if let's just go fancy, let's do a slug line,
Yep.
15 minutes later, or
Let's
time
see.
passes, something like that. And the line is thinner. Alexie slumps more.
Line thins. Alexie's asleep.
Alexie dozes.
Yeah, there we go.
The clock reads 10:30. I say more time passes.
Yeah.
I say there is no one lady's left at the register. Alexie sprawls over 3 seats. And then I would hear maybe ding, receptionist Alexie. Right? Like that's just now that is using a lot of white space, but like it's also kind of using it to kind of give a sense of rhythm and showing us information.
Yeah. No, I think that this is another valid way to do it. And this is one of those cases where it's not necessarily always about minimizing how many lines you take up. It's about using your lines appropriately. And so because this is supposed to convey the passage of time, taking up more lines makes sense, right? Because each line correlates with more time of your final film. And so we are slowing down this moment by focusing on small things, right? And we are focusing on like the time on the clock. We're focusing on these different shots of Alexie progressively falling more and more asleep. So we're showing progression in that way. And we're showing progression in terms of who's in this room, right? And I think that the sense of progression is really important. So it kind of depends on the style that you want to do. Do you want to do it with like, there was like the version that I wrote, which I think could probably be organized to look a little prettier, but is kind of using the bouncing of the leg getting faster and faster in order to convey progression and a sense of time. And then this one is taking advantage of slug lines and is taking advantage of literally identifying the time and the progression of the person waiting, falling asleep to convey the passage of time. So I think that, but both of these, I would say, is very much an improvement on the novelistic place we started, which again was Alexie sits in the waiting room, tapping her foot anxiously. This is taking much longer than she expected. Seconds turn into minutes, minutes to hours, and still nothing. One by one, the other people in the room leave until she is alone, waiting.
And again, just kind of going back to the rule of thumb, if you read it on the page, it should read on the page the way it would be edited in the movie, in your head anyway, right? And using white space is one way to sort of expand time, move it forward, and compress time by expanding it, right? Like it's just a way of moving things forward or slowing things down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say the other thing that we also did in this without even intentionally doing it was we cut out the line, this is taking much longer than she expected, right? So that was something that, how would we know? That's very much a directing note, right? Like, it's like, how would you shoot that this is taking longer than she expected? That's
That's
very
right.
much like, that's a note that you could give to the actor. That would be a valid note to give to the actor. Like, you did not expect this to take this long. This was supposed to be quick in and out, and give that to them as sort of like direction. But it is not something that particularly adds the feeling of the scene in a way that's worth breaking the don't direct on the page rule. Like, I'm not someone who believes like very strictly never, never, never direct on the page, but I think when you're going to do it for a good reason. And we aren't learning anything new with this is taking much longer than she expected that we didn't already know by the fact that she's like tapping her foot anxiously. We get it. She's wants to hurry up and get this done, right? Like, it doesn't add anything. So
That's right. And Matthew has a great suggestion. We could have had her reading a bunch of magazines and like sort of expanded the pile of magazines that she's gone through. That's another way to show the progression of time. Here we just had her sleeping and sort of slowly sprawling out and taking up more space. But there's so many different ways to do this. And also, when you actually put it in the screenplay, on the day, the director could be like, let's do this.
yeah.
You want to give your best suggestion of like, hey, how do you think this would play out?
Yeah, how do you convey the passage of time? I like the way that we wrote yours, where we have the different slug lines kind of breaking it up, because I think that the slug lines convey the passage of time even more, because typically when you have a different scene, like it's implying a time jump. And so when you use that trick in the script, it's implying these different time jumps. And that's another way to do it. But yeah, both of these take up significantly more space on the page, but they aren't just a big block of text, and it works. So,
And also, I'll make a note that if the purpose of this scene is to, show that she's been waiting a long time, we've done a great job of that. But if the purpose of the scene is something else, or it's actually not really that important to have this much expansion of time, or like there's a version of this where we cut right to the doctor's office. Like, that could be the movie you're telling. Like, it has to be important to the story to show this, right? Like,
yeah.
what is important narratively and how do you best show that, right? So, there's a version where this actually isn't important at all. We just go cut right to the doctor's office or whatever.
That's true. Sometimes you see things like this, like where it's like, okay, so why did you have Alexie in the waiting room waiting? And someone's going to say, well, every single time I go to the doctor, I end up in the waiting room for such a long time. It just
Yeah, it's a
feels
bad reason.
realistic
Yeah.
to me. If it doesn't add something to the narrative, then it doesn't add something. I could see a version of this where the point of the waiting is to make the character very agitated when she finally gets to see the doctor, and it kind of blows up or something. Like why are you insisting on emphasizing this? So that's a point that we didn't even really talk about in the other ones. We had the 3 tips, which was language and scene description, sound, and taking advantage of white space. And I guess kind of the final, almost implied tip as like a little extra bonus is is this narratively relevant? Like, how important is this information at this point?
You have
And
to
so
be able to defend every scene.
yeah, because it could be that these scenes didn't need to be in the movie at all. And so you have to be able to justify narratively why you chose to include it.
Well,
So
let's wrap up.
yeah, so I hope that this was helpful. Again, so to recap, we started with language and scene description. We talked about talking about vivid verbs. We talked about one great detail. We talked about making sure that when you do vivid verbs and great details, that they aren't confusing. If you're doing a metaphor, it should be something that when somebody reads it, they're not going to have to go back and read it twice. To understand if you mean it literally or what's going on, we want to make sure we're very clear. And we also talked about considering where you're pulling the camera lens. So if you're going from like a wide shot by talking about the whole porch to a tight shot of the flies, back to a wide shot of somebody coming out the door, you're kind of making us a little motion sick, right? So think about where you're driving the camera lens. We also talked about sound. We talked about how sound can a lot of times, like just literally the sound effect in caps on its own line can replace a ton of action, and make it feel much more immediate and dramatic. And it can also make it feel more like you're interrupting something. And then lastly, we talked about taking advantage of white space. And this is particularly helpful for distinguishing actions or conveying the passage of time rather than adding more words because this is taking longer. You can still keep your words tight, but use line breaks in order to show that time is marching on and that we are moving forward. And it just makes it easier on the eye too, to have these line breaks in order to not have a huge block of text the whole way down your page. Just like paragraph, paragraph, paragraph is going to be very daunting for a reader. So those are our tips of minimalism. And I hope that it's helpful for you as you write professional screenplays.
And when in doubt, cut the word, and if you can't defend your choice to write the sentence you wrote or write the paragraph you wrote, you should rewrite it so you can defend it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think the real seed of all of this is really arbitrary choices, right? Arbitrary choices of, that feel invisible at the time because that's the way you wrote it, right? But I think a lot of the time when we're rewriting material, we see, oh, that doesn't have to be there, or I don't have to say it that way. There's a better way to say this, right? Make sure that you cut through your arbitrary choices and make them all intentional and connected to each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the other thing, I guess one of the last things that we'll say is something that we did talk about in the beginning, which is don't lose the vibe, right?
Yeah, don't lose
The
the
point
vibe.
of the point of minimalism is not cutting as many words as you can because this is a 500-word essay and you're at 532 words and you need to cut it down before you can submit it. That's not the point of minimalism in a script. It's not just arbitrarily cutting. It's getting it as succinct as possible while still conveying the vibe that you want to convey. So don't push yourself too far by stripping everything out. So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody.
Thanks so much.
And we will see you next week. Have a good one.